You're not an asshole, Mark. You're just trying so hard to be.
No, Mark, you are actually an asshole. Hey there, folks. This is a little odd for me. I generally don't talk about big, broad topics like social media platforms, although I did talk about Twitter not too long ago. I guess this is increasingly something I feel the need to talk about. But I'm also having the odd experience of completely refilming a video, which I've never had to do before. I've had to shoot supplemental stuff. I've had to record me during the edit, explaining new stuff that has happened since I shot it and before it came out. I have had to re-record podcasts before because like something went wrong with the audio file or whatever. I've never had to reshoot an entire video. And in this case, I want to draw attention to that fact because of the reason. I felt the need to fully reshoot this video because honestly, I yelled way too much. And I'm not apologizing for the anger, but I want you to understand, I'm not above yelling on this channel. I give myself permission to express my anger when I feel it. But looking back at the footage that I shot, I was so angry for so much of the runtime, it actually felt counterproductive to me actually communicating information at a certain point. So we'll see how calm I stay this time, but if I manage to tamp it down, I want you to realize the volcano of rage that I am trying to keep a lid on in talking about this. What is this? What is the this in question? What is things? What are words? What am I doing? Well, Facebook, Meta, those jackasses. So they have updated their community guidelines, and this has gotten some press, but I do think in a lot of ways it's kind of gotten overshadowed by the firing of the fact checkers. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that like we're focusing on the wrong story. The fact checker stuff is also really bad and should have attention drawn to it. The whole idea of getting rid of fact checkers to adopt a community note style approach like frickin' Twitter does. And especially when you try and look at the justifications that Mark Zuckerberg has decided to give, which include a claim that the fact checkers were biased. And I don't know, maybe if you have two sides of a debate and one side is getting fact checked way more than the other, I'm not going to say it's impossible that the fact checkers have a bias, but I am going to say that it is at least equally as likely, if not more likely, that one side is just lying a lot more than the other and is giving cause to be fact-checked a lot more. But no, let's just get rid of fact-checkers. And also, understand, I'm going to be coming at this from a fairly American perspective because that's the one I have and it's the one I can express the best. But realize that everything he's doing has global implications. Like, it was already a big problem that Facebook is as ubiquitous as it is not just in the US, but also globally, especially when it comes to issues of fact-checking. They were already running into the problem that they were hiring an insufficient number of people who spoke the language in countries where some places have phones preloaded with Facebook specifically, and then whole swaths of that country basically use Facebook as their entry point to the entire rest of the internet. And it wasn't really being properly fact-checked before, and now that possibility of even trying to do that is gone. And yeah, the rampant spread of misinformation and leaving it to the community to note that something is wrong, I don't know. That strikes me as really, really bad. But as I said, that has gotten a bit more of the attention. And again, rightfully so. I'm not saying that we should be focusing on the community guideline changes instead. I'm saying we should be doing both because this is all messed up. So, yeah, let's do this. When I first heard that there were community guideline changes and that they were getting a lot of criticism, especially from marginalized communities and especially from the LGBTQIA plus community, I figured it was going to be bad. I didn't doubt that it was bad. But let me tell you what I expected to find when I actually looked at these things. What I expected to find were broad, sweeping changes that were, as a practical matter, going to make things a little bit worse for pretty much everybody, but we're going to make things specifically worse for marginalized communities and the LGBTQIA plus community, or the queer community, as I'm probably going to call it through most of this because it's quicker. It has a tendency to get the short end of the stick on that a fair bit. I mean, a good go-to example is honestly Twitch. There have been repeated times where Twitch has implemented changes or new features that are intended for everybody, but are, as a practical matter, actually end up being really bad for queer creators on there. The most recent example from Twitch is that they updated their policies to require that streams focus on quote-unquote politically sensitive issues are to be labeled as such, and they included LGBTQIA plus issues under that, appearing to fail to recognize that while queer rights may be a political issue, an overly broad policy would require people to flag their own streams as being politically sensitive just because they themselves are queer and are talking about their own life experience. Now, Twitch has tried to add some clarifying language to make it not the case, but like, it's still a mess. But that's the kind of thing I was expecting. A big, broad, sweeping thing that is going to be worse for queer people. That was what I expected. And that is here in the changes from Meta, Facebook. I'm going to use both kind of interchangeably. But what I did not expect to find were rules and updates and changes that amounted to, here's a bunch of stuff you can't say about broad groups of people or whole communities. Unless you're saying it about queer people, then it's okay. And I really would like that to be an exaggeration, but it's really not. And yeah, let's get into some instances so that you can see I'm not fully pulling this out of my rear end. Understand, I'm going to build to the most damning stuff, so if you hear the first thing I mention and go, that doesn't sound too bad, yeah, I know, but it gets worse from there, so let's do that. Now, as I go through this, you're going to hear me say and see in print the phrase PC, and given how often that phrase generally is used to mean politically correct, I'm going to clarify what it means in the specific contents of these guidelines, because it is defined by them as meaning protected characteristics: race, ethnicity, national origin, disability, religious affiliation, caste, sexual orientation, sex, gender identity, and serious disease. So note that in this initial definition of what a PC group is, does include gender identity and sexual orientation. So in the broad definition of what it is, in theory, anything where it says you can't do this to PC groups, that would include queer people. Now that's how it starts. We're going to scroll down from there. I'm focusing on the hateful conduct policy. And also, this is not going to be a comprehensive look of everything that is in the community guidelines changes. It is too big, and I do not have the spoons to go through everything. So also understand, there are changes that are going to impact groups aside from queer people as well. But when I get there, you'll kind of see why this is especially egregious. So under the revised hateful conduct policy, violations and descriptions of them are divided into tiers. Tier 1 covers the more openly hateful stuff, like comparisons to insects, calls for violence, perpetuating historical falsehoods such as Jews control the banking system, and other stuff that a comfortable majority of people would agree isn't really something that should be allowed to be posted publicly in a way that can be seen by the masses. So it's in Tier 2 that we find some very specific mentions of LGBTQIA plus people, since they were never used in the examples given in the Tier 1 instances. There's a section under Tier 2 that says violations of the community guidelines include, quote, calls or support for exclusion or segregation or statements of intent to exclude or segregate, and then proceeds to cite specific examples. So I'm going to jump down to the section for economic exclusion, where we get this. Economic exclusion, which means denying access to economic entitlements and limiting participation in the labor market. We do allow content arguing for gender-based limitations of military, law enforcement, and teaching jobs. We also allow the same content based on sexual orientation when the content is based on religious beliefs. So you're already kind of seeing the format of what I'm talking about. This broad statement of you can't say this kind of thing except for in these cases. And we're sort of seeing the carve-outs being made. And of course, the classic, it's okay if you say you want to exclude the gays and the queers if it's based on your religion. Look, when it comes to religion, I will continue to maintain you can believe whatever you want, but when you begin to impose those beliefs onto others who do not share your beliefs, that's where you lose me. If you think that I am an abomination under God and I'm going to hell, that is your right to believe that. I don't think it should be your right to call for my active suppression in this life. Way too many government bodies and now social media sites seem to disagree. Next example we're going to cite is the prohibiting of calls for social exclusion, where we get this quote. Social exclusion, which means things like denying access to spaces, physical or online, and social services except for sex or gender-based exclusion from spaces commonly limited by sex or gender, such as restrooms, sports and sports leagues, health and support groups, and specific schools. Now, this one I actually almost kind of get. Like, I don't think that trans people being able to use the bathroom or trans kids getting to play a school sport should be a massive political issue, but it currently is. So, given what a hot potato this has become, while I still feel that this is a cowardly policy to make, this one, I don't respect it, but I do kind of get it, given how toxic that entire subject is. Wanting to avoid looking like you are restricting that topic is, I don't want to go so far as to say politically savvy, but it is an understandable choice to make, even though it's wrong. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, these really don't sound that bad. Well, I gave you a heads up on that, but let's get to the kicker here. There's a section discussing types of insults that are not permitted, and that's where we have this. Mental characteristics, including but not limited to allegations of stupidity, intellectual capacity, and mental illness, and unsupported comparisons between PC groups on the basis of inherent intellectual capability. Translation, you can't make a sweeping statement of like, all people from this group are inherently stupid, crazy, any ableist slur you care to throw out, you cannot make that generalization about any of the PC groups listed before. You can't make those kinds of broad statements. But we do allow allegations of mental illness or abnormality when based on gender or sexual orientation. Given political and religious discourse about transgenderism and homosexuality and common non-serious usage of words like weird. And there it is. You can't make these broad generalizations about the mental state or capacity of entire groups unless it's queer people. I don't know how you can read that literally any other way. I feel like they threw that softball things like, oh, it's okay to call them weird at the very end just to try and make it not look like they're doing what they're doing. Now, I'm showing and reading you the rules as of the 13th of January, and they might end up getting revised. Though, to give a tiny amount of credit, Meta does keep the older versions of policies on file so you can see what's changed, and it's already changed at least once since the initial drop of these policies. Not substantively changed, really, mostly what appears to be an attempt to streamline with some definition clarifications. But hey, if you're gonna say that we're excluded from the protections granted to literally every other group, at least you're transparent about the process by which those rules are changing, I guess. And part of the reason I want to bring this up is because while I said that there was a lot of streamlining, a lot of the specific changes made are kind of telling. One change that actually made some headlines was that the policy used to have a heck of a lot more examples of what isn't okay, and those examples have been taken out, such as referring to women as property or trans people as it. Now, while it's true that in theory, the broader definitions that they have taken those examples out, the broad characterizations would still prohibit these sorts of things, the removal of specific examples does feel pretty telling, especially what ones they opted to get rid of, doubly so with regards to what else we know, and that I'm going to get into later. Because what I've been talking about so far is publicly viewable policies, but Meta, like most companies, also has internal documentation and guidance that isn't seen by the public and usually gets into more specifics when compared to the publicly viewable policies. And those internal guidelines were attained by Platformer, which is part of Verge Media. And those internal guidelines have a lot more specifics, not about what is excluded, but about what is now explicitly permitted. And like as a format thing to provide to the people who need to actually apply these community guidelines, that makes sense to do that in internal documents. You say specifically like, look, this is the kind of thing that you might get reports from people saying, hey, we think this is inappropriate. We're telling you now it's all right. So as a format, that makes sense. But let's look at the specific things that the internal documentation says are totally okay. Trans people aren't real. They're mentally ill. Trans people are freaks. There's no such thing as trans children. God created two genders. Transgender people are not a real thing. This whole non-binary thing is made up. Those people don't exist. They just need some therapy. A trans woman isn't a woman. It's a pathetic, confused man. A trans person isn't a he or a she. It's an it. Now, if you've been paying attention, that last one should jump out at you. Because in the examples that have since been removed, it used to be explicit that you could not refer to trans people as it. But they removed that from the publicly viewable guidelines as an example of what you can't do and have internally said explicitly, this is okay. That is the reason to remove as many specific examples from the publicly viewable policy as they did, because the more examples you provide, the clearer it is how that policy is intended to be implemented. The more you remove and the fewer examples that you have, the broader it becomes and the harder it becomes for people to call you out for breaking or failing to enforce your own policies, because there aren't as many examples for them to post to like, but you explicitly said this isn't okay and you're allowing it. Now it all becomes way more interpretable. So on the back end, they can now claim it's explicitly okay to do something we used to say was explicitly forbidden. And as long as these internal documents don't leak out, the public will never know that we did a complete 180 on the notion of calling trans people it. This is being explicitly permitted at a time of growing hostility towards queer people and trans people in specific. And it's clear that Meta knows trans people especially will be attacked because they're the ones used most in the examples cited of what is explicitly now okay. They're giving examples that they know are going to happen. And yes, they absolutely know that this is going to happen. Because now, we're going to talk about Alex Schultz. Now, before I get into this, I should not have to say any of this, but I'm going to. Do not harass this man. Do not track him down. Do not stalk him. Just don't. Leave him alone. I'm not saying he's a good guy, and I'm going to be critiquing the hell out of him, but do not go directly to him and harass him. You shouldn't need me to tell you to not do that, but don't. I am actually generally loath to name specific people other than the literal heads of corporations, which are pretty much untouchable at this point. I really don't like to name specific people unless I feel it is necessary. But here, it really, really is. Okay, so let's talk about Alex Schultz, who is the chief marketing executive at Meta. And Business Insider got a hold of some posts that he made about all this on an internal company forum. My perspective is we've done well as a community when the debate has happened, and I was shocked at how far we've gone with censorship of the debate. First off, this isn't about the debate. This is about specific dehumanizing phrases and words that are thrown around in the debate. If the only way the debate is allowed to happen or be somehow unbiased is to allow one side to say horrible, dehumanizing things at the other side, then that's not debate. And also, debate over what, Alex? It's really interesting that you just say the debate. It's parallel pretty close to when people claim, oh, well, I just believe in states' rights. Whenever somebody claims that, the response should always be states' right to do what? States' rights to do what specifically? What debate, Alex? And he won't say, because then he'd have to admit that what he is taking the restrictions off of is the debate about whether or not queer people should exist, whether or not we should have rights, whether or not we should have health care, whether or not we should be eradicated from public life entirely. But Alex feels that excessive censorship has actually harmed his own community. Oh, I didn't mention that, did I? Alex is gay. You'd think that would help, but it doesn't. This is your reminder that wealth and power are privileges that override, in most cases, the majority, if not the entirety, of the oppression someone might otherwise feel in regards to a certain marginalized status they might have in other areas. If you've got money and you've got power, it is going to disconnect you from the rest of the community that shares something that is a feature they are oppressed over. So yeah, he's gay. Doesn't matter. It makes it a little bit more painful though. So what else did Alex have to say? Obviously, I don't like people saying things that I consider awful, but I worry that the solution of censoring that doesn't work as well as you might hope. So I don't know the answer. This stuff's really complicated, but I am worried that too much censorship is actually harmful, and that may have been where we ended up. Okay, so you're taking the free marketplace of ideas, free speech stance, which, like, not great ideas, but I don't feel like fully debunking those. Okay, so that's your stance. Too much censorship, too much restrictions, too much removal of ways that people can express themselves. And you don't want to have those restrictions. Cool. Hey, Alex, why did Facebook get rid of the trans and non-binary themes for Messenger? How is that not censorship? How is that not the removal of a way to express oneself? Why is that okay? Why is that happening at literally the exact same fucking time as you are opening the floodgates for people to call us it, amongst other things? Alex also shared this gem. So the more rules we have, the more mistakes we make. Moderation is hard, and we'll always get it wrong somewhat. The more rules, the more censorship, the more we'll harm speech from our community, pushing back on hatred. What an observation. The more rules we have, the more we have to enforce them. The more times we have to enforce them, the more we might make mistakes in enforcing them. Oh, so naturally the answer is then just to not have the rules. Because then you won't have to actually do moderation, which is hard. And then you won't make mistakes in moderation because you're not actually moderating at all anymore. Is anybody else getting flashbacks to early on in the pandemic when Trump was all, actually, I want to slow down testing because he liked the numbers where they were and he knew that if they kept testing for COVID, they'd find more cases of COVID? Yeah, when you actually try and do something, you find more problems that you have to deal with. You have to actually do your job. But if you get rid of rules, oh, look at all this work I now suddenly don't have to do. I really wish we could be done with Alex, but there's also the internal post that Platformer got hold of, which expressed his belief that people seeing their queer friends and family members abused on Facebook and Instagram could lead to increased support for LGBTQ rights. Because truly, the fastest track to acceptance and social justice is to open the floodgates to allow for as much abuse of people as possible. And that'll make the straights take pity on us. And maybe they'll actually care. It's not like normalization of abuse or slurs or dehumanization ever has any negative consequences whatsoever. There's certainly no precedent for that happening. But more than anything, this internal post reveals that Alex is fully aware that abuse will increase. He's trying to sugarcoat it. He's trying to find a silver lining to the thing that he knows for a fact is going to happen. And that's the simple reality of this. Meta has signaled to the queer community that we are not safe in their apps. We do not have the protections. Explicitly, we are carved out from the protections granted to everybody else in some cases. We will not be protected. We are not safe. That is now explicit for Meta, meaning for Facebook, for Instagram. Now, one might think that this is kind of a foolish thing for a company to do, to risk alienating a chunk of the user base by openly signaling that there's an entire group that is not protected here. It's not like Facebook are suddenly going to see a huge influx of new users who think this policy is super great, actually. What is it ever going to do other than cause them to bleed the user base as queer people leave for their own safety and certain allies leave in solidarity? I'm not saying it's going to be an immediate and mass exodus, but is Mark and those executives, are they really so arrogant as to think their platforms are too indispensable for queer people to abandon? That would be quite the odd thing to think, because I promise you he's seen the exodus from Twitter over the last few years. So why do this? Because Mark and his corporate goons are thinking in the short term. And in the short term, Trump is coming to office. Trump is vindictive, just as a person. He has, in fact, promised vengeance against anything he doesn't like. So what this reads as to me is Meta trying to, just right before the administration comes in, do something that looks good to MAGA, that they can claim as some kind of victory that will make them happy, so that Trump doesn't sick the FCC, the FTC, the SEC, or who knows what other agencies onto him just out of sheer spite. He's hoping that it takes Facebook and Meta and Instagram and whatever other subsidiaries, Oculus, I don't know, off the radar from Trump's wrath. And if you've seen the kind of stuff he's been saying when he goes places like Joe Rogan, I'm not sure there's anything sadder than watching Mark Zuckerberg try and appeal to MAGA. You know what? At least when Elon Musk started really appealing to MAGA, it was because they were people who already liked him. So he was looking for a reinforcement of positive feedback he was already getting. They don't even like you, Mark. They never have. But okay. Hopefully, between the public policies and especially the internal documents, unless you are one of those people who is celebrating this as an absolute victory, I hope that if you are at all on the fence about this, that you see the ways in which these community guidelines target the queer community specifically for the removal of any kind of safety and moderation support for them, and why that makes it unsafe for us. It's signaling that we are not protected. Everyone else is, we are not. So the religious right can call us mentally disturbed, and that's not a violation. If we were to call a religion mentally disturbed, that is a violation. Now, do I think you should call an entire religion a bunch of mentally disturbed people? No, I don't think that's appropriate either. But it is really weird that they can call us that, but we can't call them that. That seems messed up to me, and I'm really hoping you see that as well. So the question then becomes, what do we do? And short answer, I don't know. From a principled stance, we should just abandon Meta's platforms. They made us unsafe, we should leave. That's the principle of the thing. As a practical matter, I don't know how realistic that is, at least in the kinds of numbers that would constitute an effective boycott. I generally don't call for boycotts, not because I think they're bad, just because I don't have faith in them. We live in a time of consolidated tech companies. If we abandon both Instagram and Facebook, where do we go to have the things that we had in those places? How do we keep those connections? How do we keep from losing our communities that we have built in these places? Also, if we're being realistic, especially on Facebook, I think as a practical matter, a lot of people, if they stay, aren't going to notice. I'm not going to say this is everyone's experience on Facebook, but I will certainly say, let's compare it to Twitter. Twitter was always very public facing. While it was possible to restrict your account so it could only be seen by a few people, that wasn't why people were there. The point of Twitter was to be seen by everybody. Not as many people use Facebook that same way, and it is way more common to have your Facebook account basically not viewable to anyone who you haven't already friended. That's how I have my account set up. I very rarely post anything at all, but I almost never post public on there because I don't need that for a public facing thing. Like, I have a page set up for the Council of Geeks, but like, that's only still there because it's super easy for me to copy and paste a blast notice of like, hey, there's a new video out, and it's so simple, I might as well keep doing it. I don't actually use it for anything. But as far as my personal Facebook goes, I'm probably not going to notice a big practical difference because I already have it restricted to being visible to people I've actually friended. And that friendship is something I can revoke at literally any moment. I think a whole lot of the queer community already went through purging their friends list of people that we have realized are deeply hostile to us. Honestly, since back in 2016, during the first Trump administration, most of us have cleared our friends list of those kinds of people. And if you then lock down your account to only be friends viewable, which again is a much more common experience on Facebook than it was on, say, Twitter, you're probably not going to notice. And no, that doesn't mean that these changes are harmless, because it means that the spaces where people talk about us that we generally don't go can now talk about us in even worse terms, more dehumanizing terms, more exclusionary terms than they were allowed to before. So the issue on Facebook specifically isn't that they're suddenly going to come and harass us, but it is going to foster a culture that is more hostile and let those people who already didn't like us be worse and crueler towards us, and there is nothing to be done about it. Instagram, however, is a different story, and for a few reasons. The first is it is way more open, and getting mass attention is largely the point, a bit more like how Twitter was. Instagram, you can actually build a business off of. Facebook, like, again, you can have a business listing, but you're not going to grow on there. And let's not forget about the context of the very imminent TikTok ban. Because if you weren't aware, Google and Meta broke lobbying records for how much money they threw at Washington trying to lobby to get that law passed, and they succeeded. Instagram stands to get a huge boost of new users or increased use once the TikTok ban goes through, because Instagram has gone out of its way to mirror TikTok. So it is, from a platform mechanics perspective, the natural successor to the user base that won't have TikTok anymore. I don't want to get sidetracked about this, but something that I want to point out that I think people really don't get, and it doesn't help the way that this whole ban has been covered, that bill banning TikTok as worded is not specifically about TikTok. It cites TikTok as its example and its test case, and banning TikTok specifically was the prime driving motivator for the calls to push the bill forward. But the bill does not only apply to TikTok. It applies to literally any foreign-owned tech company that could theoretically harvest data. The law is written so that the government gets to decide all on its own that a foreign-owned app or website is a threat to America, because that app is doing something that American companies are allowed to do without a shred of regulation, but they made the classic blunder of doing it while foreign. That'll teach you. The government may already be trying to flex its muscles on this, because recently the Department of Defense declared that video game conglomerate Tencent is a Chinese military company. Tencent denies this, of course. TikTok also denied being connected to the Chinese government. And also, there was no actual evidence that they were providing data to China, but it was simply that there was any connection at all, that the possibility existed. That was enough to push this law forward. So the fact that there isn't evidence, at least that not that they're letting anybody see that this is actually even the case, that doesn't matter. Not to mention that the possibility of selling data to China or any other hostile nation exists for literally every single company, as Facebook itself has had contracts providing harvested data with multiple Chinese companies. It was never about rights or safety. It was always about government control, and Google and Meta wanting to kill competition. And trust me, Mark needs there to be less competition because he hasn't had a new idea that worked since the initial creation of Facebook. Yes, he was the primary driving force behind the creation of the site that became the default social network. But since then, everything they've done has either been something that they had to buy or it just failed. They had to buy Instagram. They had to buy Oculus, hoping that VR would be the next big thing. It still isn't. They pushed for Facebook as a platform to have a video content focus, and that blew up in the face of every company foolish enough to believe them. Seriously, this was a massive contributor to the near total end of stuff like Cracked, amongst others.
It's not like I, or anyone I personally know, has ever experienced any negative consequences to, say, a social media platform shamelessly lying about the kind of traffic it can generate and what kind of media to invest in.
Then, of course, there was the metaverse, which was Mark's biggest push. This was the one thing where, he didn't come up with the very idea, but he had the ability to be the forward face, the biggest fish in that pond by actually building it, not just buying something that somebody else built. That was his baby, and he was so sure about it, he renamed the company from Facebook to Meta. How's that one working out? And then there's Threads, which is so forgettable, I literally forgot to mention it. I'm having to add this note in during the edit. The man's got nothing. He buys other people's ideas and throws money at trying to make competitors go away because he has to, because his own ideas suck. But all of this is important context, but it still doesn't answer the question, what do we do? Like I said, I'm not sure that a mass exodus from Instagram and Facebook is practical. I'm not going to bemoan the idea. Honestly, if we could get a large enough number of people to leave in a short amount of time, it could have impact, or at the very least be a signal to other tech companies that is a detriment for them to apply similar principles and similar policy updates. But there's another side to that as well. There is a harm that happens to the community as a whole if we leave. And I don't just mean because some people will stay behind and they'll have less community. I mean, visibility matters. And for the people who are praising these kinds of changes, they want us gone. They want us to not be visible. They want to not have to see us. They want to not have to think about us. They want us
eradicated from public life entirely.
And there is value in refusing to move. The protest chant of "we're here, we're queer, get used to it" was chosen for a reason. It is important that we remain visible. It is important to the integrity of the community as a whole that we aren't scurried away to our little gay spaces where none of the straights ever have to see or think or hear from us ever again. Because then they don't have to ever think about how we're oppressed, about our rights being stripped away. As far as they're concerned, we don't exist anymore. That's a win for them. So us leaving might punish Meta, but it is going to reward MAGA. So it's messed up. It's harmful for the community as a whole in terms of, because again, visibility matters. It matters that we simply exist in spaces so that people can see, oh, they're just people. If we're not there, then our presence isn't a challenge to the claims of how awful we are. If we're not there, what is there to counter the spin of how terrible we are? And again, there's already plenty of that going on, and it's already going to get worse just from the policy changes, but it could be compounded if we're not even present. Because we can be what's called living proof. Us simply existing and not being all of the stuff that the absolute shitheads on the far right claim that we are, that is proof that they are wrong. But that is putting any individual who does choose to stay in a certain amount of harm's way. So it's a situation where it would be best for the community as a whole if most of us stayed, but on an individual level, it's probably a good idea for a lot of us to leave because it's not safe anymore. There isn't a good option right now. There just isn't on either platform. I'd say for most people, especially younger people, Facebook is an easier abandon than Instagram is. Not that Instagram's the hottest thing ever, but like I said, it's going to be the closest thing to TikTok in a little bit. Yeah, there's YouTube Shorts, but that's not the primary reason people engage with YouTube. Like, it's just not. And for those wondering what I'm going to do, I don't know. I've got Instagram accounts, I've got Facebook accounts. And as I said, my Facebook experience is pretty walled off, and the Council of Geeks page is really just perfunctory. Instagram, I was starting to do more of a push onto, partially because I saw friends of mine get success on there, be able to use it as a springboard to direct people to their other works, or even just make money off the platform directly. It is monetized. So I was starting to do more of a push on there, but it may not be worth it now. I don't know. But there's also the issue of we're running out of places to be. And the more places where we aren't, the easier it is for the bullshit to get spun about us, because our presence isn't there to negate it. But it's not any individual queer person's responsibility to go in and try and fix this, or to be, the rock in the stream unmoving. So I don't know. Like, there's just right now no good options. And the only thing that I've got right now is I really just hope that other companies, like say Google, don't look at what Facebook is doing and then adopt the same thing. I'm hoping that they look at that and look at the pushback and go, oh, okay, so we won't do that and we'll be the alternative. Now, granted, Google doesn't really have an alternative to Facebook itself, but YouTube does have YouTube Shorts, which is theoretically an alternative to Instagram-ish, sorta, kinda, not really, but hey, why not? But if Google does decide that, oh yeah, us too, we're going to adopt that, then I really don't know what I'm going to do, because Google owns YouTube. I can't make a living minus the income from YouTube. Patreon is the bigger help. That is a higher percentage of my income, and if you can support me on Patreon, that would be amazing, especially now. But like, I can't cover my living expenses on Patreon alone. I need the income I get from YouTube as well. And if this platform becomes any more hostile than it already is, and it already ain't great, I don't know. But I don't want to look too far down like the doom hole of how bad this could go. By nature, I'm not a, oh God, what if? I am by nature more of a, I will deal with things as they actually happen, because otherwise I will stress myself out about the possibility of what could happen. And while I'm not saying we shouldn't at least be aware of what some of those possibilities might be so that we're not completely blindsided, at a certain point, it stops being preparation and it starts being just depression. So, yeah. But I needed to talk about all this because, as I said, I'm not sure people understand the extent of the problem. This is really bad. And I needed to know that I used my largest platform to attempt to be sure that people were aware of what was going on. That we are being openly targeted and carved out from the protections. Here are the rules that protect everybody, except for the queers. So that's about it. Thank you for listening. Got a little heated at a couple points. I kept it down pretty well, I think, for how truly angry I am. But whatever your thoughts are on any of this, as long as you keep them polite, call me names and slurs and all of that, I'll just get rid of the comment and ban you. But as long as you're not doing that, drop your thoughts down in the comment and let's talk about it. I already plugged the Patreon. Like, share, subscribe. The YouTube things. You know the YouTube things. What I really want you to remember right now, especially right now, is that you are beautiful. You are valid. And you are loved. You are the council, and I am just running the meetings. Until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Goddess Elida, Zubin Lopfula, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Alistair McPherson, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Movie Turtle, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernabi Likes the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, White Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Adam RDL Taylor, Pal Barabajagal, Mira G, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. If you'd like me to... I read the names fine, then screwed it up. If you would like to hear me try and say your name while these guys chitter in my ears, check out the rewards on my Patreon. Yeah, you're not distracting at all.